A boom time for retailers over the Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales, but the best may be over. The Reserve Bank apologises to homeowners who took out loans on the basis of what the central bank said last year, and unrest grows across China over the COVID zero policy hitting financial markets. It's Tuesday, the 29th of November, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Big show. So much going on, particularly in Canberra. I mean, we have lots going on in financial markets and corporate news and all that sort of stuff. But wow, the government is really pushing through some legislation at the moment.
Yeah, there's plenty to talk about. And the interview today, Sean, is well worth sticking around for because I didn't know really much at all about nickel, except for the fact that everybody seems to want it at the moment. But you've got to chat with Peter Harold, the Managing Director and CEO of Poseidon Nickel.
Yes, look, it's a bit of a 101 on nickel, but it goes well beyond that. And just some of the facts and figures that Peter has at his fingertips about how much nickel is needed in a lithium battery, for example, compared to other elements. It's just a fascinating chat.
Yeah, and nickel's had an extraordinary year, and he kind of goes through it all in kind of terms that everyone can really understand. So it is a cracker coming up a little bit later on. But the main story this morning, Sean, we have just had 4 days of sales from Black Friday through to Cyber Monday, and the early evidence, certainly based on the credit cards at our house, suggests that it has been record-breaking.
Yes, certainly at our house too. In fact, Michael, I've got almost all the large items I need to buy for Christmas now.
Oh, well done.
Based on foot traffic and anecdotal feedback, it may actually be the best 4 days ever, according to the Australian Retailers Association, at least for that period, the Black Friday to Cyber Monday period. But that probably reflects Christmas shopping done early, for example, myself, yourself, Michael, or people delaying purchases until the sales. So the actual success probably can't be judged until the end of the Christmas season. Boss of the retailers, Paul Zara, who used to run David Jones, Mr. Zara said the rising cost of doing business, supply chain disruptions and staff shortages remain top of mind for retailers, but certainly there were plenty of people in malls over the past 4 days. A few have come out. Jerry Harvey was one from Harvey Norman to say it was a bumper weekend.
Yeah, well, it might have been a strong 4 days of selling, Sean, but retail sales went backwards in October for the first time this year.
That's right. They dropped 0.2% last month, taking the total turnover for the month to about $35 billion. Now, that's in-store and online, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Compared to a year earlier, when stores were in lockdown, sales are up more than 12%, so they're still doing okay. If you look at the retail sales trend, it tumbled at the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, then surged. It remains well above trend, so a fall isn't that surprising. Maybe it reflects the higher cost of fuel and mortgage repayments as well.
So does this mean then that the best is over?
Probably, and that makes the Christmas selling season very, very important for all those retailers out there. People are getting over the post-COVID spend-up. You know, we all jumped in, bought stuff when we were free from restrictions. Well, that seems to be waning somewhat. People are also facing higher mortgage payments as rates rise and their loans come off fixed-rate deals. And, of course, cost of living pressures remain. Think petrol prices. There's plenty of reasons to think the best from the consumer is now over. Add in woeful consumer confidence, it's at recessionary levels consumer confidence. It just doesn't augur that well for consumer spending in the economy in 2023. And consumer spending, sort of retail spending, is about a third of the total economy. So very, very relevant.
Yeah, it doesn't look too good. All right, local markets. What happened yesterday?
S&P ASX 200 closed the day down 0.4% to 7,229 points. Most of the negativity was all about what's going on in China with a growing number of COVID cases and protests. More on that a bit later in the show. But the impact on markets is noteworthy. The energy sector, for example, fell back as oil prices hit their lowest level since 2021 on fears of the world's second largest economy, China, slowing down. Santos and Woodside Energy both dropped 2.7%. Lithium stocks continued their decline of late last week for the same reason, China. Liontown Resources was off 7.5%. Lake Resources was down 5%. Among the large caps, Diversified Miner South32 and Gold Digger Newcrest Mining were both off nearly 2%. Seems to be a trend here. All those commodities and miners aren't doing so well. Westpac, Wesfarmers and Rio Tinto all dropped more than 1%. The tech stocks were among the best performers yesterday, with WiseTech Global up 1% and online property outfit REA Group up nearly 2%.
All right, what's happening on international markets?
I mentioned oil a moment ago. Brent crude is heading towards $80 a barrel. That's its lowest this year. China is also a key reason for a rise in the US dollar. Now, remember, the US dollar is considered a safe haven. When things don't look so good, people buy the US dollar. That sent the Aussie dollar back below 67 US cents yesterday. Cryptocurrencies have also been hit a bit, with Bitcoin now trading around 16,100 US dollars a unit.
Okay, plenty happening. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the board of Bank of Queensland has removed the group's CEO, George Frazis, after just 3 years, saying that the lender needs a different skill set for its next stage of development.
It isn't something you see very much on the ASX, Michael, when a listed company or the board of a listed company steps in and says the CEO's done a good job, but it's time for a change. Fraser's came from Westpac. He successfully transformed the bank to be more growth focused. That was his reputation when he came in. He certainly has done that. He's improved Bank of Queensland's mortgage book, its technology stack or its back end, and he spent $1.3 billion acquiring ME Bank, which Bank of Queensland's board says was a success. Chair Patrick Allaway, who will become executive chair while a search is undertaken, yesterday thanked the outgoing CEO and said the bank wanted to focus more on execution rather than growth. Now, media reports have previously suggested some disquiet between Frazis and the board, particularly over the fact that the CEO, Mr. Frazis, hired his godson into a senior role without actually telling the board of that relationship. And the board has also been slightly critical of expensive off-site meetings for the executive team. Now, Bank of Queensland's share price closed down 5.6% yesterday. Investors weren't impressed, but it's just a very unusual occurrence.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, that one. But how about this one, Sean? I mentioned this at the top of the show. Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe has offered an apology to people who took out home loans based on the central bank's guidance that interest rates wouldn't rise until 2024. And that was a statement that we heard many, many times.
Many times. I mean, I think yesterday's apology is probably unprecedented. Certainly, I can't remember it ever happening before, where a Reserve Bank governor says sorry for getting it so wrong. Remember, up until late last year, the bank kept saying the next rate rise wouldn't occur until 2024 at the earliest. And then it didn't say anything else. So really, it pretty much said that until the first few months of this year, or that was the inference all the time. But of course, things changed, and since May, the official cash rate has gone from 0.1% to 2.85%. It's likely to rise further. Dr. Lowe made the apology before a Senate Estimates Committee yesterday. He conceded that the central bank was partly responsible for the outbreak of inflation in Australia, but he defended the pandemic-era stimulus measures that the RBA undertook, which of course was part of the reason for inflation jumping as much as it has.
Sean, you mentioned before that there is plenty going on in Canberra at the moment, and really we've got Parliament sitting now for the final week of the year. A bit to get through here. First up, the National Party will oppose Labor's proposed Indigenous voice to Parliament.
Leader David Littleproud said the party believed in empowering local Indigenous communities rather than creating another layer of bureaucracy in Canberra. He said the national voice would not help close the Indigenous disadvantage gap and could not be supported by the junior coalition partner. Of course, it means there won't be bipartisan support on the vote, and it does potentially create a problem for the Liberal Party as well. Individual National Party members will be able to campaign and vote as they see fit.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says Cabinet has backed all 6 recommendations from the Bell inquiry to prevent a repeat of the Scott Morrison Secret Ministries saga.
That's right. The Prime Minister says the House of Representatives will move a motion to censure his predecessor over the scandal. Former High Court Judge Virginia Bell found that Mr Morrison's actions fundamentally undermine the principles of responsible government.
Another big one, Sean, workplace sexual harassment laws passed through Parliament.
The new laws come from Sex Discrimination Commissioner Kate Jenkins' Respect at Work report and place a positive duty on employers to take reasonable and proportionate measures to eliminate sex discrimination, sexual harassment, and victimisation as far as possible. I think it's great when a report is undertaken, and in this case it's about sexual harassment, but more generally, when a report is undertaken, comes up with some pretty sensible ideas and it makes it into legislation. Doesn't always happen, so we should applaud it this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more to wrap up everything that's happening in Canberra at the moment. A bit of good news here, Sean, as well. ASIO has downgraded the risk of local terrorist attacks from probable to possible.
The intelligence body said the degradation of Islamic State and Al-Qaeda groups had made Australia safer. The threat level has been at probable ever since 2014.
Okay, now moving away from politics, Acciona Energia, I hope I got that right, Sean, I've been practicing for some time, will build a new $2 billion wind farm, providing considerable impetus to the Sunshine State's efforts to be 80% renewables by 2035.
The 1,000 megawatt Herries Range wind farm will be built near Warwick, 150 kilometres southwest of Brisbane. That precinct will now have renewable projects worth $4 billion on site. That's a combined total power of about 2,000 megawatts of renewable energy, which is enough to power 1.4 million homes. The Herries Range wind farm, which will have 180 turbines, will be Acciona Energia's third clean energy project in Queensland. Now, I hope you note I said Acciona Energia just to prove that I could say it, Michael.
I was waiting for it. I just thought, please, you can't leave me to do this on my own. Considering I am frighteningly monolingual. I can speak one language and I can barely speak that one, which is English.
Well, we actually interviewed the CEO of the company not that long ago. His name is Brett Wickham, and we asked him exactly how to say it. And he gave us a lesson, Acciona Energia. So there you go. Anyway, Queensland State Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk said the Acciona deal showed the state was a front runner in attracting international investment in the race to net zero by 2050.
Okay, now a cargo of Australian LNG has berthed at the port of Rotterdam, possibly the first time a local cargo of LNG has made it to Europe for sale.
After leaving the Woodside Energy-run Northwest Shelf export terminal near Karratha on October 29, the shipment arrived in the Dutch port of Rotterdam last Saturday, according to consultancy Energy Quest. A report in the Financial Review says the length of the trip, 11,000 nautical miles, that's a long way, typically precludes LNG produced in Australia being exported to Europe. Mostly our exports go to Japan, China and South Korea. But of course, Michael, these aren't normal times, and Woodside has signed supply deals with European customers, hoping to fill the hole left by the ban on Russian exports.
All right, now we've spoken a lot, Sean, about Whitehaven Coal and its peers, mostly because the price of the commodity is just so high and the energy company's share prices are at record levels. Yesterday, Whitehaven was at it again with its share price rising another 4%.
And that's despite the group's chair, former Deputy Prime Minister Mark Vaile, selling 200,000 shares for about $1.8 million. Last week, the Chief Executive, Paul Flynn, sold 900,000 shares for nearly $8 million, which sent the group's share price lower. Now, investors don't like seeing the top brass selling shares because, presumably, they only do it when they think the share price is outperforming or won't go much higher. The reality is a bit different. Often these strong runs mean executives end up with tax bills, maybe they've got to pay the school fees. Mostly execs are actually restricted when they can buy or sell stock as well. Hence, they only have a window to do it. The upshot of all this, really, is that Whitehaven was higher again yesterday, and it's up about 300% over the past year.
That is it's a pretty extraordinary story, isn't it, what has happened with Whitehaven and its peers?
And what I think is amazing is how many investors out there think it still has a way to run. Now, this is not an investment podcast. Go and get professional advice if you're going to invest. But Morningstar earlier this week named Whitehaven as a company that still had a way to go. Others we've spoken to just see Whitehaven, New Hope, some of those coal companies as still some way to run, which I think is quite phenomenal. I mean, Whitehaven's up 300% in the last year. How high can it go?
Yeah, indeed. All right, moving on to overseas news now, and protests in China are spreading to multiple cities as anger builds against Beijing's COVID-0 policy.
Social unrest is becoming a major issue for President Xi Jinping. There have been large protests in Beijing and Shanghai, as well as other parts of the country, as citizens vent against COVID restrictions. There has been a heavy police presence in some areas, particularly in Shanghai. Financial markets have fallen in response to the unrest. Yesterday, a BBC reporter was beaten and kicked by police during a COVID-19 protest in Shanghai that he was covering. He was eventually handcuffed, arrested, and held for several hours, according to BBC. Michael, it is a very tenuous situation, very dangerous.
Yeah, it sure is. And finally, Sean, Canada is boosting military spending and expanding trade ties in the Indo-Pacific region as part of a generational shift in foreign policy aimed at building stronger ties with Asian allies and countering China's influence.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It does, just a little bit.
And it's funny, Canada and Australia are so similar in many ways. And we're the ultimate frenemies because we obviously, Canadians and Australians, we love each other, but we are fighting over export contracts and all sorts of things. And their relationship with China has deteriorated notably in the past couple of years, just like Australia. Now, we seem to have picked it up. Anthony Albanese has obviously met with Xi Jinping, but the Canadian-China relationship remains very, very stressed, shall we say.
Yeah, well, I mean, we saw the Chinese president reprimanding Justin Trudeau at the G20, which is just extraordinary. The fact that we actually saw that happening on camera, like, ooh,
incredible.
This is not a nice relationship.
Anyway, Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy includes nearly $2.5 billion in spending on Navy patrols in the region, intelligence and cybersecurity, and increased cooperation with regional partners in the East and South China Seas. According to Bloomberg, the document refers to China as an increasingly disruptive global power, but acknowledges the need to work with it on issues such as climate change, global health, biodiversity, and nuclear non-proliferation.
Sean, you left it right to the very end, but my highlight of the show came quite late today when you used the term frenemies.
Frenemies.
Not something I expect to hear from you, really.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a very kind of modern term.
Now, yes, right, frenemies. Well, I mean, I'm a modern sort of guy, notwithstanding yesterday's quiz was all about the name of the lead character of a TV show, which it turns out piloted in 1963.
That's right. Well, we actually we had a handful of people get in touch with us to let us know that it was, in fact, Gomer Pyle.
It was too. Yes. I remembered Gomer. I couldn't remember his surname. And Jim Neighbour, I think, was the guy who played it. Anyway.
You have not inspired me to go and track down any episodes. I'm sorry. It doesn't grab me.
It was before my time. It was in black and white. And the point of it was Gomer Pyle always used to say, surprise, surprise, surprise in a certain voice. And it was very irritating. I wouldn't watch it.
That's a strong endorsement from me, Sean. All right. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Peter Harold, the Managing Director and CEO of Poseidon Nickel. This is a cracker of a chat. It really is.
It sure is. We get to understand all about nickel, why it's gone so hard, prospects for the future, where Australia sits in the global outlook for nickel production, what electric vehicles means in terms of nickel production. Fascinating chat.
Yeah, it is. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Tuesday, the 29th of November, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.